Hi, thank you for watching Digging to China. I'm Dong Xiong. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. Xi Jinping's strong emphasis on China's food security is rooted in his personal background for laboring in rural areas during his youth. When he was sent to Liangjiahe, he actively participated in daily farming and agricultural activities. Even after assuming leadership, he continues to prioritize visits to rural areas where he inspects and shows keen interest in the food consumed by farmers. An intriguing aspect of his visit is his habit of examining the stove in their households, curious about the dishes being cooked or steamed. This demonstrates his genuine concern for the well-being and the sustenance of the farming communities. Xi Jinping stresses the importance of self-sufficiency in feeding China's population. He warns against the belief that industrialization alone can resolve food security and make agriculture insignificant. Additionally, he discourages depending on the international market to address this issue. After a brief review of the information, I looked into China's degree of dependence on imported grain, and the findings were quite concerning. As of 2021, China has enjoyed 18 consecutive years of abundant agricultural production, with consistent growth. Even though Henan, a prominent agricultural province, faced a flood in 2021, it did not impede the nationwide increase in grain production and a successful harvest. The authorities have not disclosed the specific measures taken to achieve this growth despite the flood in Henan. However, another noteworthy aspect is the significant surge in grain imports in 2021, reaching a record high of 165 million tons, representing an increase of over 18% compared to 2020. This growth rate is substantial. Conversely, soybean imports have experienced a decline, with only 96 million tons imported, reflecting a decrease of 3.8%. For years, the Beijing government has consistently promoted the notion that China, with 9% of the world's arable land and 6% of its freshwater resources, is capable of feeding almost 1/5 of the global population. However, the reality tells a different story. Since around 2004, China has transitioned into a net food importer. This fact remains unknown to many, as numerous Chinese still perceive their country as primarily agricultural. Despite China's current focus on industrialization, agriculture is still regarded as a fundamental sector. Nevertheless, since 2004, China has relied entirely on imports to meet its grain demands. In truth, China's domestic food production is no longer adequate to sustain its entire population. Allow me to provide you with an explanation. Grains can be divided into two main categories: staple food and feed oil crops. Staple food includes rice, wheat, potatoes, taro, and other similar crops. China has achieved a self-sufficiency rate of 97% for staple food, meaning that it can meet almost all its domestic demand for these crops without relying on grain imports. However, the self-sufficiency rate for feed and oil crops is much lower. Take soybean as an example. China's self-sufficiency rate for soybean has been declining in recent years, dropping from 61% to 17%. Approximately 60% of the world's soybean trade is directed to China. At the onset of the US-China trade war, China ceased importing soybeans from the United States. Consequently, Chinese importers turned to Brazil as an alternative source. However, Brazil's domestic soybean production fell short of meeting the demand, prompting them to purchase soybeans from the US and resell them to Chinese importers, thus driving up the price of imported soybeans in China. Without the soybean imports, China would face shortages in soybean oil and animal feed. A similar situation exists for rapeseed, as China heavily relies on imports. China's dependency on imported feed and oil crops is notably high, with the self-sufficiency rate for oil crops plummeting from 81% to a mere 2%. In summary, China's grain self-sufficiency rate stands at approximately 75%, resembling the level seen in Japan and South Korea during the 1980s. However, it is crucial to recognize that China's high self-sufficiency rate of 97% for staple food is attained by incorporating other grain sources into the Chinese diet. Without these supplementary sources, attaining grain self-sufficiency in China would be unfeasible. Many young people may struggle to comprehend because they haven't experienced the hardships of hunger. Individuals from my generation who grew up in China understand what it was like during times of scarce resources. Purchasing food requires not just money but also ration coupons and a limited availability. There were coupons for rice, flour, oil, meat, fish, and even tofu required a certificate. Exceeding the allotted quantity was not permitted. In major cities like Beijing and Shanghai, adults were assigned 14 kilograms of rice and flour per month. You might think that 14 kilo is a substantial amount for 1 month and wonder how it could be consumed. Well, you are correct. It was simply impossible to consume it all. Even to this day, I only consume around 3 kilograms of carbohydrates per month. Furthermore, it's important to note that the quality of the rice and the flour back then was significantly poorer compared to what is available in supermarkets today. They were often adulterated with other substances like potato flour or cornmeal. Additionally, dietary habits have changed over time. Today, people consume less staple food because they have access to a variety of animal protein sources. If you engage in weightlifting or muscle strengthening exercise at the gym, you can quickly build muscle mass due to the significant intake of animal protein and higher oil consumption. However, this was not the case in China years ago. Looking at old photographs from 4 decades ago, you will see that the physically laborious workers appeared thin with clear defined muscles. This was because their diet consisted primarily of carbohydrates with minimal intake of animal protein. The carbohydrates they consumed converted into sugar, which then either transformed into fat or replenished their muscles. As a result, they had lean and tightly toned muscle fibers. During that time, people relied heavily on carbohydrates for sustenance. However, the dietary landscape has undergone significant changes in China today. There is now a substantial amount of animal protein in the population's diet. Therefore, China's claimed 97% self-sufficiency rate for staple food is based on the current dietary structure, which includes a significant consumption of meat and oil crops. It is essential to consider that if China were to face a situation without meat and oil crops, and if it becomes isolated from the rest of the world, unable to import animal feed or oil crops, the self-sufficiency rate for staple food would not remain at 97%. At that point, there would be a substantial increase in the demand for carbohydrates among the Chinese population. This simple logic seems to elude Xi Jinping, who emphasizes that China's food supply should not rely on the international market. However, without the access to the international market, the Chinese population would face food scarcity, and there wouldn't be enough to eat. Though starvation might be avoided, but only just. Eating just 14 kilos of staple food per month will not be enough to satisfy a person's hunger. Back in the days of a planned economy, there was a popular saying that illustrated the extent of someone's huge appetite. It was said that they could devour a whole shoulder pole's worth of steamed buns, meaning they could eat a stack of buns from the top of a shoulder pole to the bottom. Why were they capable of consuming such a large quantity of steamed buns? It was because they lacked other food options, especially oil and meat. If they were provided with an abundant supply of fish and meat for a month, they would certainly not be able to finish a shoulder pole's worth of steamed buns. Why can't Xi Jinping grasp this point? It is simply impossible to sustain the livelihoods of the Chinese people without international trade. Without international trade, maintaining the current living standards of the Chinese population would be unattainable. In such a scenario, the country would regress to a planned economy and return to the era of rationing, at the best preventing people from starving to death. This is a foreseeable outcome. The Minister for Agriculture of the Communist Party of China, Tang Renjian, has acknowledged that China's grain supply is in a delicate balance and faces significant challenges. However, his claim that the Chinese government has the ability to ensure that all 1.4 billion Chinese people have timely and sufficient meal is misguided. The government cannot guarantee whether or not the common people go hungry. The responsibility for ensuring food security ultimately lies with individuals themselves. In the history of Communist Party rule, the Great Famine of 1960 was a direct consequence of the party's interference in rural production. The more control the Chinese Communist Party exerted, the more people suffered from starvation. The implementation of people's communes and high-level collective farms aimed at eradicating remnants of capitalism resulted in the catastrophic famine. If the CCP refrains from such intervention, the common people would naturally have enough food to eat, and at the very least, there would be no food shortage. Chinese farmers not only feed themselves, but also feed the bureaucratic class of the Communist Party. These bureaucrats, who lack an understanding of agricultural production, audaciously dictate terms to the farmers. They even emphasize their ability to ensure that the entire population of 1.4 billion people in the country can have their meals on time. Without the CCP meddling, not only would the Chinese people have their meals on time, but they would even have additional meals. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button right here. I'll see you again shortly. Until then, be well.